Is
however.
open source recession proof? Now, I can tell you that in past economic downturns, the companies that I've worked for have done better in that when I'm in the open source space. They've actually, done better because people try to cut costs. But I think we've reached a point now where open source isn't necessarily about cost savings. We'll just say, what the fuck is happening with all these companies laying off everybody?
Oh gosh. Came in real hot there. Caught me off guard.
You have to go hot, right? Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck? You know, here's what I don't understand, Avi. Like, we've got all these companies that have raised billions. Let's be honest, billions last year.
Yeah.
And they haven't burned through all the cash. A lot of them haven't even gone to the point where they've even hired to the plan that they had when they got that. But they're all just lining up to lay off people. Why? And I know, like, it's a preemptive thing, but is there a herd mentality that's going on here a little bit where it's like, oh my God, let's batten down the hatches because these other guys are?
I mean, there's got to be some of that going on, right? I mean, if your competitor, especially, if you think about like competition too, like if your competitors are taking a strategy of, oh, we're just going to outlast you, then that is going to make you have a little bit of pause. Like, there's always the wisdom of, you shouldn't pay too much attention to your competitors, focus on your customers, but, you can't ignore your competitors either.
What's really interesting, though, is like when you have, like I remember seeing a week or two ago, it was like, oh, IBM announces their best sales quarter ever. And then the next day they announced a whole bunch of layoffs. And you're like, and here's the weird thing is I wonder how many of these layoffs are excuses for clearing out projects that really didn't go anywhere. And it's just like, it's a good excuse, right? The economy's bad. Let's just clear out these dead projects or these things that didn't quite work the way that we thought. It's a good excuse to go back and maybe be a little more prudent.
I guess, like, in some ways, because other people are doing it, it makes it a little bit more, like kind of defensible, justifiable to do it yourself. Like, if you were trying to trim fat in a big company, now is a great time to do that. Which, is a bit cynical, I suppose, but it's probably true in many cases.
I mean, it's weird because a lot of these are relatively new hires, and the plans that were good like 2 weeks ago to grow the business, or that I needed this, all of a sudden became redundant, or I don't need it the next day. And it's always hard to kind of justify and swallow. Now, I've had to lay off people, right? It sucks.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
I don't wish that on anybody. And you have to make really tough decisions. And, there's a difference between like, we need to do this to survive beyond 6 months versus we need to do this because everybody else is doing it.
Right. I mean, if you're one of the really big companies, you're also much more impacted by just the general economy too, right? Like if a sector is going to slow down, you're going to be feeling that in a lot of different places, in a lot of different ways, and you have to be a bit more reactive to that and a bit more, get ahead of it too in some ways. Because I mean, if we're, we were seeing a lot of really fast growth when borrowing money was very cheap. You can just get a lot of investment. Just money was flowing a lot faster. And therefore, it's just in your interest to borrow as much of it as you can if you have the ability to. And then when things slow down, you can't just keep that pace, right? You have to adjust.
Well, then you have to adjust to a point where you can live back within your means. So you think this is more of a let's run to get as much of the piece of the pie as we can, and oh my God, we overextended ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of people say something to the effect of this is just a readjustment back to where things probably should have been, and a lot of companies were just over hiring because they could.
I don't know. In my mind, that's just a really shitty business model, right? I mean, let's be honest. Like, to like, I'm going to hire people. I don't know if they're going to make us any money or do any good for us, but I'm going to hire them just in case. Because that's the sense that I get.
Well, I don't know that I don't know if I'd agree that it's just in case, but it's that, because we have access to more capital, we can take more bets.
More risk.
Yeah, more risk. Yeah, exactly. You can take on more risk, you can try more things, and the things that you're trying, you can do them faster, with more resources. And so, you're just going.
But there's some value in that, right? Like, so here's again, I'm going to say yes. Okay, so I know that, like, we've extended, we've maybe consumed too much, and there was some idea, some plan, some formula somewhere that said if I invest, $2 billion or whatever number in this, I am going to have this financial windfall in so many days. Did the formula change, or did, like, the economics enabling the format or the formula change? Was it like, oh yeah, in 5 years we're going to make this. Oh, we're not going to get to 5 years at a run rate. Or is it like all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, yeah, that was just maybe like this really pie in the sky bet because we got so much money, we might as well just spend it. Is it fiscally responsibility, or is it just like them just being like, woohoo, we got free money. Let's
suddenly
run with
I don't see or hear you anymore. I guess we'll have to edit this part out whenever you come back.
Go for it. Yeah, you're back now.
And we're back. I think it's probably a bit of both in a lot of cases. If you have the ability to take more bets or more concentrated bets, and you have the ability to do that, you as someone running a company have the fiduciary responsibility to do that, because that's going to push your company the furthest. And if you're seeing suddenly markets change, you have to adapt to them. And I think perhaps there was just a lot of, just really aggressive risk taking happening that wasn't really accounting for a potential recession or, downturn, whatever we're going to call it right now. So yeah, I don't know. I would say it's almost definitely a mix of both of these things, but I would hesitate to say that there's, kind of broad scale irresponsibility happening. It doesn't read that way to me personally.
Okay. So
I don't know. Do you disagree? Oh, okay.
Well,
no,
I mean, I have been preaching for the last few years that the current economics of most companies, especially in the open source space, are unsustainable. That the cash flow is not where it needs to be. That the profitability isn't where it needs to be. You're spending $2-3 for every dollar of ARR you're getting, and that has become, or had become, the norm. And it's like, this isn't sustainable. Now, I'm not trying to say like, this is like that reckoning, but it's something that, simple me, who does not have an economics degree, and I'm not like, MBA, master from Harvard or whatever, it's like you're spending way too much. And you just keep on spending more to make every dollar, and eventually there will be some profitability. It's the eventual profitability model, right? And I'm like, this just doesn't make sense. Like I get like placing bets, right? But when after 5-6 years the bets don't pay off, and then you have to change licenses, and then you have to do all these other shenanigans to try and generate more money because it's not paying off, then I'm like, so whatever long-term plan spend at whatever crazy rate you can, the formula isn't panning out at the end. So they're trying to change the variables.
I mean, do you think that layoffs are evidence that the model's not paying out or playing out?
Well, so again, this is where it's like, is this an excuse or something else? Because if you look, there's this is not just a tech thing. This is a whole world thing, right? This is, tech has been hit hard. Yes. Tech has maybe spent more than other folks. And it could be just a factor of the nearly free money, right? Interest rates and everything else being so low. It's like, just take whatever you can. And there's been so much money that people they've just been investing like crazy, right? If I say I have an idea, I've got 30 people lined up to give me like, a couple million to, try and make a, company out of that. I mean, that not now, but like, a few years ago.
Still now.
I mean, hey, I got an idea,
now.
everybody. You want to send me some money? Send it over this way. But no. Seriously, I mean, I think that this is where I think that there is a couple of factors at play here. Number one, and again, my completely just this is my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. I mean, I think that that free money has definitely had a play for it, but even before the free money, I think that fucking Jeff Bezos did this to us. He's
an easy finger to point.
Yes, I'm going to point the finger at him. Okay, and but by the way, Jeff, please don't sue me for saying that. But I think that you look at this and it's like this growth at all costs mentality, and it's that if I ever make $1, then I should be fired or have $1 in profit because I should be reinvesting as much as I can in that growth cycle, which is an interesting mentality. And everybody follows the winner, but not the losers. And how many companies have followed that trajectory in the past and have failed? And if you look at the last few recessions, now I've lived through the initial .com boom, bust, scenario. And it's like, I can tell you that 90% of the companies didn't exist because they had the same issue where they were not profitable. They had a level of buzz. They were throwing money at stuff. It just didn't work. And eventually some of them did survive, but it was a small number.
Is that bad?
No, not necessarily. It's just that I think in today's place where we're talking about, many of these companies are infrastructure companies, and they're companies that are building software that many of us rely on. It makes it much more risky than before.
That's true.
In the first .com boom, if pets.com went under, fuck, I can't get dog food. I got to go to the grocery store. If you are relying on a cloud provider that goes under and disappears, you are fucked.
Yeah. And that's why open source is such an important thing here. It's more, I think it ensures that the software will live beyond the organization that is building that software.
However, open source recession proof? Now, I can tell you that in past economic downturns, the companies that I've worked for have done better in that when I'm in the open source space. They've actually, done better because people try to cut costs. But I think we've reached a point now where open source isn't necessarily about cost savings.
No, not at all. Yeah.
There is an investment in open source that needs to be made. Now, we were at FOSDEM the other week, and I did not get to see it, but I did look at the slides in the paper. Somebody gave a talk about the winners and losers in FOSS. Okay. And Mike Nolan, for anybody who's listening or whatnot, from the Rochester Institute of Technology, where he did this, study where he looked at open source stuff. And one of his conclusions was right now, more of these large companies are funding open source than independents or, companies that are focused on the open source side of things. So the Microsofts, the Googles, the whatevers. And these are more susceptible to layoffs. And these are also working on projects that are not directly generating revenue. So his hypothesis is that they can be hit harder by layoffs, which actually impacts these projects in quite a negative way. In fact, I don't know if you had caught the article the other week by Stephen Vaughn Nichols, but here we'll just share my screen. We'll just share it. We'll just share it.
I don't think I saw this.
We'll just share it. Okay. What is Google doing with its open source teams, right? And so, Stephen actually suggests that the impact on Google's open source teams was greater than the non-open source teams. Now, again, I don't know if that is true or not. Okay. But it could just be that there are so many open source people, it looks more proportionate. It's maybe proportionate to the rest of the layoffs. I'm not sure. I haven't done analysis. I don't know if you can, right? I mean, this is probably a little bit anecdotal, but the idea here is, hey, layoffs happening. And, a lot of these open source program offices, these open source places are getting hit. And I can tell you that every big company that I've ever worked with, it is a very standard thought process when it comes to layoffs. And that is, A, we're going to look for the nonprofit centers first, right? So if you are not directly tied to revenue, you're at the top of the list.
Yeah.
Now that means marketing, that means, potentially like admin, recruiting, those types of functions. But is open source falling into those functions now?
Probably, right?
I mean, especially if you're not directly selling the open source. Like you can make the argument, for instance, folks who make their living off of the open source software that they're shipping, whether, it's a Confluent or, it's a Mongo, open source like, software here, or, it's, the MySQL team and Oracle, like they're focused on monetizing and commercialization. So they actually, if they're hitting their numbers, they're fine.
Right.
But if you have no numbers to hit, that's where the risk comes in.
Definitely. And I think, it's really sad to see. But I think whether or not, the exact numbers here about the claim at Google is true or not, which, we don't have the numbers. It's hard for us to say. That reasoning makes a lot of sense to me, and I would expect to see layoffs in these sectors if it's not, or these teams in organizations, which is bad for open source, surely.
But I think that the open source companies are like, and the ones that I said that, hey, they are for profit, they are not insulated from this as well. So obviously, GitLab, right? Stalwart of the open source, love GitLab.
Because who are they trying to sell to? They are trying to sell to these companies who are also laying people off and spending less money, and budgets are tightening, and it just, it affects everyone. Everyone.
Yeah. And I mean, like, they're not the only ones. We last couple of weeks we saw Ivan, lay off 1 out of 5, people.
GitHub.
That's a pretty big hit, right? 1 out of 5. And again, a lot of these, it's interesting because if you look at the engineers generally aren't as hit hard as some of the other business functions, but they are there. And even today, DigitalOcean, 11% of their staff, right?
Oof.
And redundancy, reorganization. What's always funny is it takes some crisis for people to realize like redundancies exist. I don't know why that is. Like, do we just get complacent? Right? Like, so, yesterday we weren't redundant. Yesterday we didn't know how to do this without 200 extra people. Today we figured it out. Like overnight I had a dream, and that dream told me how to reorganize and still get the work done with less people.
I mean, because no one wants to lay people off, before you really have to, or feel like you really need to. It's such an easy thing to just put off if there's nothing really urgent about it. And I think that's, a thing with a lot of just running businesses, is that you're responding to a lot of, what's urgent and what like must be done. I could see it just being very easy for bloat to just slowly, creep into an organization. It'd be really hard to avoid it, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're flush with cash, okay, and you have a lot of money, like people give you leeway to try things.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, when new management shuffles in, and right now the tenure at a lot of tech companies is less than 2 years. Right? It's not unheard of to have high, levels of turnover. And when those new people come in, those old things are just like, I don't know what they're doing. We'll just let them kind of sit over here and do their thing. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. We're just going to focus on my new things. And then they add their new projects and they leave. And then someone else adds their new projects. I think it's the island of misfit toys at some point mentality. And I think that can happen to a lot of companies.
Yeah. And I mean, similar, like this is why private equity, or one of the reasons private equity can exist is like there's just a lot of bloat in a lot of different companies.
Oh, yeah.
And
come in and just shoot.
You just come in and chop off half of it. Like suddenly that company, on paper is a lot more profitable and a lot more efficient. But, there's a lot of, people casualties to that, which is very sad to see and are kind of, the victims in that.
Yes. So I do not want to sound like the cruel-hearted bastard. I am not a cruel-hearted bastard.
If anyone is here, that's going to be me. I'll take that role here.
No.
Got my CEO hat on. I need to get a CEO hat.
No, I'm not. I mean, I could put the supervillain hat on, but that still doesn't make me a cruel-hearted bastard. Here's the thing, right? If the programs and the activities that we're doing now are not leading towards profitability, we should be using those people and refocusing them before you get to the point of the layoff. Right? If you're working on projects that are dead ends or they're not going to go anywhere, and that, there's a chance to pivot and reuse those people instead of just having them work on a dead end project.
But it's not really that simple, though. Like you can't,
It is that simple, Avi.
It's not. No, it's definitely not. I mean, you'd have to pull the plug on projects prematurely, right? Like some projects, are. Maybe they will become successful in just another couple months and we just need to keep pushing. But then some external force says, well, the cutoff is actually right now. And then you're like, okay, well now we have to do what we have to do.
I'm looking out to try and find the profitability for some of these companies. Just right around the corner. I can see it now. I know it's just coming up. It's out there, right? I get that. I get it. There's always the question, like, are we just 1 month away? Are we? But this is where, this is where you should have leading indicators that show that's going to turn out. And I think that people get sloppy. I think they get sloppy in like not looking at necessarily the right set of metrics. Maybe they don't have the right indicators that can predict, are these things going to pan out? Because,
Yeah, but I guess I think the thing that the kind of philosophy that it sounds like you're advocating for is a much more slow and careful and methodical growth, which I think, definitely will lead to more sustainable companies, less turnover, but it also might lead to less innovation. I think the fact that companies have, leeway to take risks and try really weird shit and just see what happens is a great thing. But the drawback to it is that there's more volatility. But with tech generally, I think that's where some of the best things come from, is just things that, were maybe a little bit tangential, a little bit not obvious, the value that they would have right away, and they become super successful. If Google was being very careful all the time, Kubernetes would not have happened. Like, why would they have open source Kubernetes and built this huge ecosystem? Well, it's because they had the leeway to take risks. Try something.
I am not saying not to take risks.
No, I know, but I think that, well, you're kind of advocating for less risk.
No, what I'm advocating for is fail fast.
Okay.
Right? If you have these trials, these things that you're going to do, great, wonderful. You know what? Go ahead and let try them out. And you should see indicators. There has to be something and hey, 6 months, let's say 6 months, a year, whatever the time frame is that you think is adequate to incubate this. But you have some concrete things that you're going to be looking for to say, yeah, maybe we can't commercialize this now, but in another year we can. And here's why, right? So if we'll use the Kubernetes example, there was probably enough indicators from a Kubernetes perspective that it was worthwhile to invest in, or it was strategically important. There's also strategically important projects that you will have to get involved in, right? So, you look at from a strategy perspective and you think okay, this is something that I know is not going to pay money right now. It is not going to be something that is going to build a sustainable business, but this is so strategically important so we can tackle this thing in a few years. It needs to be there. And that's cool.
That is cool, but that's also probably some of the people who are getting laid off too. If it's well, this is strategic for us, it just can't be prioritized right now.
Could be.
But yeah, and I think, similarly, like fail fast could take different forms, and I feel like failing fast and laying off 11% of your staff is a form of that, probably in one point of view. I don't know. It depends.
I'm a fan of incubators, right? And I am a fan of like incubating lots of stuff, trying it out, and let that team move on to something else. Like if you hire the right people and they're smart enough and they're adaptable enough, you're going to have them, the capability for them to jump to A to B and, to do that. And that's cool. And you know what? People in those teams like it.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
It's fun. It's exciting.
Because it's like, okay, that worked, that didn't work. Like let's see what else comes up with. And I can tell you, that a lot of things like, some of the OpenStack stuff, some of, which eventually led to some of the Kubernetes stuff,
right.
all of these things, okay, started in incubator teams.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And do you know where a lot of the first research and development came from for a lot of these technologies? A project that you probably don't even appreciate.
What is it?
Drizzle.
What is that?
So long ago, okay, there was this debate at MySQL. Okay. And the debate at MySQL was the MySQL code base is bloated, it's not modern, it sucks. So one of the folks who was on the team, Brian Aker, was like, this totally sucks. I want to rewrite it all. I want to rewrite a better database. So they went off and they spun off Drizzle. Okay. And that team eventually got, brought into Sun, and there's a whole story behind that, which is fascinating. And we should totally go into that sometime. But they went into Sun as an incubator team to incubate Drizzle. Eventually, Drizzle got bought by, Sun got bought by Oracle, which they're like not interested in yet another database, especially one that will compete with their databases. So they went to Rackspace and worked for NASA and a few other places. And a lot of the initial framework that they had to build for Drizzle led into improving things like Jenkins, improving things like the continuous CI/CD pipelines, that the tools and things that we have today. But that team continued to work on that, and then they migrated over to HP and a few other places where they started to work on OpenStack. And it's like those teams, started to kind of like the ball rolling. Anyways, so I didn't mean to get into the whole incubator thing. It's a cool story. I really like the story. It's really cool to go back and look at some of that and acknowledge the past. But we're here to talk specifically about layoffs and the impact on open source. So we can say, without a shadow of a doubt, that open source, has been impacted by the economy, and it will continue to be impacted by the economy. That doesn't necessarily mean that, you shouldn't contribute or you shouldn't explore it if you did get laid off.
Not at all. Yeah, no.
I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that many companies hire from their contributor base.
100%. Who better to hire than someone who has already shown that they can be a productive part of your team?
Right. That's right.
It's like, and absolute no-brainer.
If you are looking for, for work, that is a really good way, if you're already involved in certain projects, to start contributing more and become more valuable, especially to those companies that are hiring or are looking. A lot of core engineering folks at these companies, they're definitely looking for folks, and that can help not only hone your skills, but potentially get you into a few of these places.
And I'd say also to, if you can find companies where open source is more baked into their DNA and not something that's kind of off to the side, something that, I guess we should also do some open source stuff too, because it might be first to go then. Yeah.
So so I had a really interesting conversation with somebody who I won't name names or companies or whatever, but big company does a lot of open source, and they're like, we're trying to make our name known in the open source space, but they just don't get it. They view it as completely just a business strategy to, a freemium model, right? And you would be surprised if I told you who the company was, right? And it was like, that's what they're there for. That's how they open source, right? If it has to be part of that freemium model. And, I think that is difficult to suss out sometimes.
Yeah, that's true.
Because those types of companies are in open source until the model fails them.
I mean, I feel like probably most people are in open source until the model fails them, right? Like, what's
No.
what's the point of being involved in a model that doesn't work for you?
Well, okay. There's different levels of success.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's be honest. And
Yeah.
where do you draw that line, right?
Right.
The level of success for a $1 billion company has a revenue number that's much higher than somebody just starting out. I mean,
Totally.
If I can make a couple $1 million a year and I have, little expenses and, little overhead, yeah, maybe I'm good. Maybe that's my lifestyle company that I want.
Right.
Right. Or even like companies that are in that small mid-size space, maybe like, hey, our growth trajectory, we want to hit 100 million. That's our focus. And we can hit 100 million, being that core open source. Or, maybe you're people like Bruce, who we just talked to today, who's like, I just do it because I love it. Right. I do this because I love it. And I love the ecosystem and things. But, that doesn't mean that open source can't be part of a commercial strategy. It's just that if the commercial strategy, let's say the commercial strategy is viable to 500 million, that's really good business for a lot of companies.
Yeah.
But really shitty business for a lot of mega corporations.
Yeah, and the ones that took on a ton of VC money, it doesn't. The math does not math out, unfortunately.
Anyways,
Yeah.
So, anything else you want to say about layoffs or the economy?
I mean, I do think that it's going to impact open source in even more ways than just layoffs and jobs. I think, we'll see companies be less willing to sponsor events because their marketing budgets have tightened.
Oh, yeah, that's always true.
Yeah. We will see less sponsorship and funding of open source because it's really hard to demonstrate the ROI of that money beyond just let's keep open source healthy, which is a great, message, and it's true and it's good, but then you have all the tragedy of the commons kinds of problems. And so I think this is going to impact in a lot of different ways. I think if that you are an open source maintainer that lives off of donations and contributions.
Oh, you're gonna get me started on that, Avi?
It's a tough spot to be in right now, I think, which is really difficult.
Because okay, so I'm gonna share with you what I shared with Avi the other day. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna switch my screens just because I have to share. This. Look, if you are surviving off of donations, that is not a business model, right?
It is not.
You are busking for dollars. That is not a sustainable model.
It's not. And I think that
you know what happens when you don't have $1 to give the busker? You just pass them by.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I think that, it's my hope that there's more maintainers that reach for, just more commercialization strategies that are a bit more reliable than just kind of hoping that people are going to send you money. Because, we will definitely see a tightening of that for worse or for worse.
But the good news is, look, TechCrunch just today said the tech market might not be as shaky as it feels.
Maybe. I don't know. Time will tell.
Right?
Time will tell.
Yeah. Yeah. But a lot of layoffs keep on rolling. I mean,
it is very.
Meta is reporting a new fresh round of layoffs.
Ugh, gosh.
Yeah. Twillio. I know a lot of people who got hit on Twillio. That's pretty bad. Now, this one came up that was interesting. This one is Core.js chief complains open source is broken. No one will pay for it. But he's in Russia and going to jail. So
wow, what a glib subtitle. Yeah, I guess going to jail might have something to do with it. Yeah, I mean, perhaps.
But I think this also gets back to not all open source is commercially viable for folks. Right?
Yeah, it's so tough for the transitive dependencies. It's such a hard problem because a lot of people don't know that they use Core.js. Like, they're not relying on it directly. It's such a tough problem. And I think one thing that I've been frustrated by when I see the discourse around this is just kind of writing it off of, this guy's in Russia or this guy has, shitty opinions or whatever that might be, which fair and probably true. I'm not, but that doesn't mean it's not an issue that a library as pervasive as Core.js can't pay the basics to keep him on it.
That's true. There's a whole sustainability issue with some of this as well that needs to be solved. But got to be solved.
Got to be solved.
With less money, it's not going to get solved easily in the next few years.
Very true. And so the soapbox that I will get on once again is that it's very important that in the open source space we have a better idea of what companies are relying on what software. That's a very key piece, I think, to ever really getting at this problem, because a lot of people are just using this stuff and they don't know about it. But if they did, you at least have a shot at doing something about it.
Yeah, true. Now, here's one that has nothing to do with the economy, but I think you'll like.
Okay.
The database legal war that could be decided by the name given to this license. Oh, this is all about Neo4j suing another company because they released something under AGPL version 3 and a common clause license. But the common clause added a restriction to forbid the sale of the software.
Interesting.
So this one is interesting. It's basically a licensing discussion, but it goes back to adding some shenanigans to your licenses. So I'll send this over to you to take a look at. But I know you always love to get into licensing arguments.
I sure do. Proportional to how much I know about licenses, which is not really all that much at the end of the day. But we've talked about this, the AGPL. I am not a fan. And so to me, it's basically saying, hey, we had this license that had some really weird restrictions, but you added these different weird restrictions that are less common and therefore bad. To which I say, you already had weird restrictions. I don't know.
So,
do you have anything else? Any other opinions on this?
No. I just wanted to throw that out there to give it some shade.
Yeah. If anyone listening has opinions on the AGPL, the GPL, any license in general, we'd love to hear from you.
Avi wants to hear from you.
I want to hear from you, and I will send it over to Matt so we can bother him with it too.
No.
Yeah. I think this was a good discussion.
All right. Well, we'll try to have more of those.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening.